now to the final main stage session of this first day of Beyond. I'm really thrilled to be chairing this session too. We've seen from ABBA and Rematch how these new immersive formats and technologies can create very interesting new experiences for audiences around the world. But not every show can build its own theatre or create a site-specific experience. And one of the things that I think has been holding back immersive content is the lack of distribution outside the headset. Now we're seeing a new wave of immersive venues attracting audiences from London to Las Vegas, Montreal to Tokyo. And one wonders, is this turning point delivering a real business model for immersive formats? Or are these venues distribution chains just for their own content? So to explore this, I'd like to welcome to the stage a panel of absolute experts in immersive art. Hilary Knight of AEA Consulting and former director of digital at Tate. Mark Grimmer, co-founder of 59 Productions and writer and director of David Hockney, Bigger and Closer, Not Smaller and Further Away, and the inaugural show at the immersive venue Lightroom in King's Cross in London. And Michael Couzigou, CEO of New Art Experiences, and for many years previously, director at the Atelier des Lumières in Paris, the first digital arts centre in France. Welcome to you all. Do come and join me. I thought we might start by just getting each of you to maybe to talk a little bit about some of the immersive things you've been working on, just to give a snapshot of the level of experience. Do you want to start first, Mike?
Yeah, I've been the director of Atelier des Lumières in Paris, so it was a huge experience for me because it was the first time we opened this kind of venue in Paris. So we started in 2018, and we welcomed the first year, we welcomed 1.2, 1.3 million visitors. So we were prepared to welcome 300,000 visitors, but we make 4 times or 5 times more. Yeah.
Excellent. Hilary?
I feel like a slight fraud. I'm not making anything at the moment, so I'm just chilling out here listening to everybody else. But I suppose I can explain a little bit what I do. So AEA provide business and strategic consulting for the arts and culture sector. We help people with their business planning, their business models. And with my background in digital, I'm really interested in new digital formats and new spaces, new cultural formats, and how the sector is changing and being changed by these sort of new kind of experiences. Immersive has been in the culture sector for millennia, since we were flickering lights onto cave walls. But this is kind of a new way of approaching it. Okay. And then, I have a background at Tate where I did VR experiences and we did experiences within the gallery. So I'm sort of bringing practice to theory in a way.
Well, I was going to ask you as well before we go on to Mark, just to sum up what's changed in 7 years when you started doing, early immersive experiences. What were they like compared to what's going on now?
It was much more VR based, so very much around headsets and crafting experiences that were either sort of lent more into gameplay, so the interactivity was sort of based on those technologies, or were very much on rails, so were kind of cinematic experiences inside headsets at that very early point. And there was also a bit of a flurry during lockdown to recreate galleries, recreate existing spaces in that digital realm rather than use the tools to create something new. And then it sort of appeared, I suppose it's kind of funny, like ABBA Voyage, it felt like it just sort of appeared. There's suddenly many, many more immersive experiences that began with kind of IP-free art content, touring experiences. I'm sure we're all aware of Van Gogh Lives and similar experiences that toured and attracted audiences in huge numbers. But also what's happening is, and those are kind of new commercial disruptors to the market. At the same time, we had art galleries and spaces like Tate presenting exhibitions that had more immersive elements to them. So Kusama and Olafur Eliasson exhibits that were much more immersive. And I suppose over time, what we've seen is the kind of intersection of game, storytelling, film, screen-based culture, and technology, and those tools and the technology becoming more and more accessible to mean that, and the skill set maturing in the culture sector, so the confluence of all of those things mean that we're seeing a bit of a flurry of immersive output in lots of different ways, and it's really fascinating.
Thank you. Mark, tell us a bit about what you've been doing. And of course, we've got a bit of a video which we can play and you can talk over if that's helpful.
Yeah, feel free to start that whenever. I mean, I'll say a bit about 59 Productions. I mean, our background is in theatrical design. We talk about what we do as story-driven design, but we're a multidisciplinary design company, and we work on exhibitions, stage shows, pavilions, opening ceremonies. And one of the things we wanted to do was to find a venue where we could host some of our work for a longer period of time, to have a more permanent home. So we formed a joint venture with the London Theatre Company run by Nick Heitner and Nick Starr, who we knew when they used to run the National Theatre. And we opened in February a venue called Lightroom in King's Cross that we've kicked off with this show that I spent best part of 3 years making with David Hockney. And the plan is to make a sort of slate of shows that can run in rep a bit like they would in a theatre. So Hockney's the first show, but the plan is to have between 4 and 6 shows over the next couple of years, and that they can be rotated in the same way that the rep of a theatre would be. So it's really, I guess, a coming together of digital design, audience experience, theatrical storytelling in a kind of immersive environment. So it's a hybrid form that we're exploring. The video showing sort of the first sort of public audiences and test events that we were holding back in February 2020. We've just opened a second outpost in Seoul in South Korea with the Hockney exhibition, with the Hockney show rather, and then subsequent shows will also be distributed there. So like everybody, we're sort of slightly making it up as we go along, and we're conscious of the fact that this is a very fast evolving, changing landscape, and we're just, I guess, curious to explore the ways in which these formats and these technologies can be used to reach audiences in different ways.
Yeah. Straight away, I've got to ask, even just looking at that video, is what are we learning about audiences? How far is this just drawing in an existing audience for family, sort of spectacle? And how far are you drawing in people who, say, wouldn't have traditionally gone to an art gallery? I'm interested in, for all of you, what you notice about audiences. You want to go first, Michael?
At Atelier de Lumière, we were really surprised by the profile of the visitors, in fact, because it was really large in terms of profile. I will say during the week, we had a lot of senior people, and we thought that we could only attract millennials, but in fact the seniors are really curious. They are really into techno, and they wanted to know what is immersive art and what they can learn. The only bad subject we had sometimes is that people were really troubled because they thought they are coming into a real museum with real paintings. So when we started with Klimt, some people said, where are the paintings? wait. And then they see another experience. So we just had to do some pedagogy to tell to the audience that you are not coming to a museum. This is not our role. It's something different than a museum. So it was like evangelization of the market. So now I think the market is really huge because there's a lot of different experiences across the world now in terms of immersive experience, and it's a huge success everywhere, in fact.
Interesting. Hilary, what do you notice about audiences and potential?
It's no doubt it's attracting audiences who wouldn't necessarily go to see an exhibition at a museum. I don't know that they are the magic bullet. So if for an immersive experience to be cited in a museum, for example, I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to bring in an entirely different audience profile. And also, like anything in culture, it does depend on the subject matter of what it is that's present in there. I was really interested to hear about Rematch and their audience profile. That's a very, very different audience profile than you might get to a Klimt exhibition. So I think, that there are parallels, but what it is drawing in are people who are curious. And I suppose, like you, when we opened the Modigliani VR experience in 2017, I think it was, I was expecting and it sort of was slightly cynically trying to bring in a younger audience into that exhibition. But actually the profile of people exploring that VR piece went right up to octogenarians. So it's as diverse as the culture sector can be. And which means we cannot just sit on our laurels and put something into a projection map, something onto a wall, and thereby diversify your audience. You still have to think about the subject matter and think about how it's relevant.
Yeah. Mark?
Well, I think I agree with Hilary. I think, interestingly, for me, this is a format rather than a genre, or a series of formats rather than a genre. So I don't think we would necessarily ask the question of, what sort of audiences does television have? I mean, it's enormously diverse depending on what the subject matter is. So, there's a pretty clear audience demographic for the David Hockney show, which skews a bit older, skews towards the kind of traditional museum-going audience. But I dare say if you made a show about a completely different subject matter, you would find, as the Rematch guys have done, that your audience is more reflective of the story that you're trying to tell. It'd be interesting to see. There's not a huge amount of data for us yet, but it'd be very interesting to tell. Yeah.
So I'm going to dive straight into the subject that's come up to me over the course of the day, which is where potentially you could go with the type of content. So we've seen discussion from Les about sports events as history, which reminds me of things like Secret Cinema in the UK, which of course was turning films into a kind of whole social pre-experience before you got to watch the film. That seems to be wonderfully what you've done with things like the Rumble in the Jungle. But I was thinking, like the new Ridley Scott film, Waterloo, you could start getting into thinking about, immersive historical events, and that could get ethically tricky. And even, I hate to say it, but we know that the so-called adult industry, the porn industry, is the biggest thing out there in tech. And and there's money to be made. And I just wonder what your thoughts are about, are there ethical lines? Where are things potentially going with this kind of thing? Do you want to go first?
I hadn't thought about it. But look, I think it is like any new format. It takes time for those lines to be drawn, I think, and for people to get a sense of how they work and what audiences will want and what will be successful. For us at Lightroom, our focus really is on collaboration with living artists and organisations. So perhaps we're slightly less likely to go down the route of mining material that might be problematic in some way or that might have some more ethical questions. It's much more of a kind of living art form in that sense. Mm-hmm. So I think it very much depends, I think, on what the material that you're using is. Are you doing anything which could be accused of being a sort of form of appropriation, or if you're using material which is in the public domain? It'd be interesting to talk to you about this material that's in the public domain. The copyright-free material feels like it's a different conversation, perhaps, than saying to David Hockney, would you like to make a show about your life and your work? So again, I think it's more resides in the subject matter and the material than the format in a way, but I guess it's different for different companies.
Yeah, in fact, we are starting to discovering now with my new project. It's like maybe we will see the image, but
we can put up the image maybe, and you can talk to us about it.
It's because most of these experiences are concentrated in big cities. Mm-hmm. If you want to see a cool experience, a cool immersive experience, you have to go to London, you have to go to Paris. But when you live outside these big cities, you don't have access to this kind of experiences. So to me, to resolve it, it was, I just wanted to create my own venue. It's like a modular venue. So we are like new type of fairy ground people, gypsies in digital art. So we are going to travel and tour this modular building. It's 400 square meters to different cities in France and of course in Europe and maybe in UK. So we will develop different boxes. And so inside you have a 360 room with 4 walls, and we can project on the 4 walls. The exercise, it's really different than cinema. And when we talk about this new type of format with cinema school or professional of cinema, they say, what can I do in this kind of immersive room? Because I've only learned to do a mise en scène in a frame, in the cinema. So we are out of frame. Mm-hmm. So we have to do a new type of mise en scène. We have to do a new type of storytelling. We have to invent something totally new in the audiovisual industry, in fact, because now we have the technology to do that. But we need the writers. We need to have the storytellers. There's no school for now. There's no campus to teach how you produce an immersive experience. It doesn't exist. So there's a huge opportunity to teach this kind of new mise en scène. But about the theme, what you can do, it's totally crazy because you can do what you want, in fact, from literature, from painting, from science, from art, even fiction. You can write like a series in a 360 way, but you have to think about your mise en scène in a different way than only in one screen, in fact. So it's changed a lot of paradigm, in fact. So what Mark says, we are learning, you know, each year we are learning. We see how the people react also in the room, because we see the reaction. And what I think is the same sometimes, that maybe you will say, but at Atelier des Lumières, most of it's a walkthrough experience. But most of the people were seated just on one wall, and they just watch one screen. Because we have l'habitude to see one screen, TV, cinema, computer, we see only one screen. So we are not made, our brain is not made for 360 things. So it's really, really hard, you know, to take people, to see, to walk through an immersive experience. It will take time, but
it's interesting that, sorry, go on.
I was just going to ask Hilary,
Yeah,
and
well, I
then
suppose
do come in after that.
on that. I suppose I was just sort of mulling, because again, like you really thought about the adult industry, just the horror.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to put that out there.
Unsee my mental image. But I suppose what I was thinking, there's also a risk, right, in the new experiences that are being created about who gets to make them.
Yes.
And what stories are being told using these experiences. And there is an opportunity with new formats and new spaces to actually invite more people in and to have more creative. So I think that hasn't changed. That challenge to the culture sector about who is included, who is creating the stories, what stories are being told. And at the moment, a lot of the trends thus far have been, and I think that's due to the rights, honestly, lots of kind of quite heritage content. Established canon.
That's the trouble.
And what we haven't yet seen, but I hope will emerge. I think, you know, maybe the rematch Rumble in the Jungle, there's a hint of, you know, what other stories can we tell from other cultures, and what might be emerging from other regions in the world? What stories will emerge out of the Middle East? What immersive kind of stories will emerge out of Asia and Africa? And as the technologies and the techniques and the formats sort of mature. And we don't yet know, I think, but we have just come through a period, I think, of rights-free, the Western canon. But I think also they have seen a very sharp increase in uptake, and you know those audiences have gone. But actually, the formats are emerging. New things are coming to market. I think the trend for those, I suspect, is peaking or has peaked. So. I don't know. And now I've said that on camera. I'm hopefully not proved wrong. But you know, so that was a short, sharp peak. But I think they've also demonstrated a case that's demonstrated there's an audience. It's demonstrated that there's appetite. Now, what else can we do?
Yeah, Mark.
No, I was just going to say that it's interesting that I think that there's two parallel learning processes going on. There's the people making the shows and, you know, the questions around who those people are and who they're speaking for and the stories they're telling. There's also a learning process for audiences, as Michael was saying, in terms of, you know, an acclimatization to how these formats work. And I think a little bit further down the line, I think we'll learn from audiences more about the sorts of experiences that they want to see, what's successful, what could be expanded, what is working, what isn't working. And I think right now, you have to kind of have a sort of strong enough sense of confidence in what you're doing, but it's kind of terrifying to put work out there when you really don't quite know whether people are ready for it or how well versed people are in the medium in terms of how they respond to it.
Hilary raised a really interesting issue, which is the challenge of the fact that at the moment it feels like there's a lot of heritage/nostalgia content. And I know to some extent the internet has enabled young people to learn a lot about, well, you know, whether it's sort of music. I mean, the Beatles are done more in the charts again. It's not all just the over 70s downloading that stuff. But I wondered what all your thoughts are on genuinely new content, which doesn't rely on kind of existing artists or established names or kind of IP-free content. Tell me a bit about what your thoughts are on.
Yeah, we are working with a young creator also from cinema schools or motion designers, and they want to explore new fields in terms of immersive experiences, because as you know, there's about 12 different immersive Van Gogh across the world that's already touring now. So Van Gogh is à toutes les sauces.
There's sort of 12 different Van Gogh immersive
12
experiences.
12 different Van Gogh, 12 different production. You put a diaporama of Van Gogh with a large screen, okay, and it's easy money, and you call it immersive experience.
Yeah.
And immersive is a totally marketing word, but it's not seamless. It's just screens, multiple screens. So I think of course, it was really important to attract the main audience, to take them to see Van Gogh, to see Klimt, to see Monet, etc. Everything is free of rights, so it was easy for us to produce this kind of production. But for what Mark made with Hockney, to me, it's really, really interesting, because in this example, you have the artist himself that work on a immersive digital thing.
At the cutting edge of using all the new technologies.
Yeah, to me, it's totally phenomenal, and the show is really, really nice. It's totally incredible. So yeah, there's two sorts of production. Some of guys are doing like easy money, with free of right content. And we try to find another way, we try to work on this immersive, seamless screen, how we can do a mise en scène, how we can invent new type of storytelling. So there's a lot of research and development, so it's the part really interesting that we do now for this project.
Mark next.
There's a commercial imperative here, which I think is really interesting. I wonder if there are parallels with the early days of cinema, where, I guess initially it was about the spectacle and the experience just of the format being new.
It was enough to see real life projected on a screen.
Yeah, dioramas, and these things do have short sort of half-lives, I suppose. The truth is, when you're launching these sorts of venues and projects, they're expensive. And I think there is an imperative to start with material which you feel commercially confident in, and that there's a good chance of there being an audience for, whether that's a living artist or a subject matter or iconic sports events. I'd like to think that the equivalent of independent film is around the corner, when we've kind of learned a bit more about how the format works, and maybe we're all feeling a little bit more financially stable, and therefore a little bit more emboldened to take some risks with content which might be innovative and new and more diverse, and it doesn't necessarily need to kind of carry the commercial burden of some of these early projects.
And I'm curious to see what appears to be commercially viable in sort of a few years' time, if we think about younger audiences whose touch points, whose cultural touch points are all online, all through social media and YouTube and TikTok, and what that means for the creative, and gaming, what that means for sort of the creative subjects and themes and topics that they go on to create.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned gaming. I mean, what's really, really interesting is seeing the impact of the generations, multiple generations that grew up with video gaming as a big part of their social life. Obviously playing online, and we've seen it a lot, certainly in the London theatre scene, much more, it's immersive theatrical experiences where you go with a group of friends and you go round it, sort of the promenade theatre experience. What are your thoughts about the impact of video gaming technology and what we can learn from it that we're perhaps already seeing, or that you plan to try and use in the kinds of art that you're developing in these venues? Maybe Michael first.
For us, it's really interesting because I will speak about Unreal Engine. So it's a game engine made for gaming, and now it's used for cinema, for XR production, etc. So we can use like Unreal Engine environment decor that we can project into the box, and we can create a total 360 landscape. It's really realistic. It's really photorealistic, but it's totally 3D. So this kind of tools didn't existed maybe 10 years ago or five years ago. So the progress of these kind of tools make us to work with it, and the people the creative teams who come from video gaming are really into 360 mind, So They help us to tell some stories in a 360, in an immersive way. So it's like a VR production, you know, but you don't have helmet glasses. So it's a VR environment, a projected VR environment, but you have to place yourself into this room in a 360.
And I'm interested in those creatives, and are they playing with giving audiences agency? Because one of the big differences between games technology and the projection style immersive experiences we're talking about is a lack of audience agency. And you sort of see glimmers of it in things like team lab exhibits where your presence in the room sort of changes what gets projected, things like that. But do you see that kind of thing coming about?
So I've worked, after Atelier de Lumière, I've worked at Moment Factory in Montreal, so they were really experts into interactive things. It was totally crazy what they made. But to me, the audience is really not, the large audience is really not aware with this kind of tools for me. And when you tell a story, the risk with interactivity is like you have like a gamification of the experience. So you see the children running everywhere. So for team labs, it's perfect because they're building a total environment for that. It's a mix between art and leisure, you know. In my project, it's passive. It's like a new form of cinema. So if people have to interact, etc., in the room, it can be a mess at the end. So. Yeah, and this kind of interactive tools are really, really complicated to set up. Even mostly when you tour, it's really hard to control it properly. And the audience, if it's just to put your hand and make some particles, to me it means nothing. Yeah. Okay, it's cool, but what else? You know, it doesn't tell anything. So, but the tool existed, so we can use it, of course.
Yeah, Mark, you would add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Michael. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes sort of technical workflows, software that's been developed specifically for the games industry, which is immediately relevant to anybody trying to speed up the process of making animated content for immersive experiences. I think that's a big connection. I think there's another thing about writing for these experiences, which is a sort of weird kind of genre of its own. And I think it has some similarities with the way that gaming is written. And, you know, certainly with the Hockney show, it very much was written, but it didn't sort of stick to the conventions of how a documentary film or a sort of narrative fiction works. It's much more branching than that. And obviously you're considering multiple simultaneous perspectives. You're having to think about how audiences, you know, people could be watching 4 or 5 completely different things at the same time. So I think that's an interesting thing where gaming has clearly got a lot it can teach us, I think, about different forms of narrative structure that might work better in an immersive environment than traditional sort of screen-based writing.
Can I ask a bit about the idea of inclusivity with audiences? I was just thinking we're so much more aware now about things like neurodiversity, and some of the kinds of experiences we've been talking about, I could imagine would be really off-putting to people who might be neurodivergent. Also issues about accessibility, depending on the nature of a disability. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about how far the kind of immersive technologies we're talking about are genuinely going to be inclusive, or it's going to be an add-on or an afterthought.
In terms of profile of audience, what I've seen with Atelier de Lumière, we could welcome a lot of groups of children coming from the neighborhood, the banlieue of Paris. Yeah. And it was the first time they had a contact with Van Gogh or with Klimt. It was in a digital way. But they never opened the door of Le Louvre or Orsay to see a painting. They came to Atelier de Lumière. And it was like a way for them to discover art. In fact, it's in a digital way, but it was like the first contact they had with an artist, a classical artist. So in terms of accessibility, yeah, I think that digital art can bring people coming from different horizons, and there's not like the sacred side, you know, of museums. You know, in France, the Louvre or Orsay are really big institutions. You know, it's like there's like a sacralization of art, of culture in France. So some people can come, some people never have the opportunity to go to this kind of museum. And when the COVID came, the Louvre lost 80% of their visitors, because 80% of their visitors are coming from outside of France. You know, they are tourists. There's only 20% of people coming from to visit the Louvre. So in terms of accessibility, I think that the museums in France, they have a lot to do. So that's why maybe some of them are really interested into this new type of digital tools. It's another question, but yes, in terms of accessibility, of course, it can attract a lot of people, and the younger one, of course.
But I think also in terms of thinking about people's access needs, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I'd be really curious to know what you think as well. I mean, I know of a few immersive experiences that will have an alternative version or particular sort of screening times for people who are neurodiverse, for example. The physical access is generally catered for, but I think sort of the neurodivergence and that sense of overload, I'm not clear on, and I'm not sure that we are really as a sector.
No, I think it's maybe less to do with the specific technology and more to do with the whole audience experience. So I think it's about having trained front of house staff. It's about having enough front of house staff investing in the team who are kind of running the operation. We've designed breakout spaces at King's Cross specifically for people who might be neurodivergent or have other kinds of needs and might need to take a break from the experience. We've done relaxed performances. We've done performances specifically with lower volume levels. And, so actually, it's actually a very flexible medium to cater for people with different accessibility needs. We made a BSL version. I mean, obviously, with David Hockney is deaf himself, so that was always a big part of the kind of communication with him, was thinking about, well, how can we make the story accessible to people who might have different needs? So I think in some ways, we're quite well set up as an industry to give audiences a sort of considered and kind of sensitive experience. But, it's possible to moderate the programming and things like changing light levels and changing... and actually, it's okay for people to... I think we're more tolerant of all kinds of different behaviours. I mean, I say we are. It's interesting that quite often when the audience is skewing older, they can actually tend to be, this is a generalization, but tend to be less tolerant of children running around or people who are behaving in an atypical way for an art gallery. But I think we've got an opportunity to slightly rewrite the rules of audience behavior and to let people know that actually it's okay to behave in different ways in these sorts of spaces.
And Mark, something you said much early on was you said you hoped that we were on the edge of the idea of, indie makers taking over this technology. And at the moment, it still feels like there's a lot of financial risk potentially in investing in some of this. Some of the examples we've seen over the course of the day have been kind of big successful operations, sometimes set up because someone's had a great idea, but we're also often talking about big institutions being able to stage things. What are your thoughts about how far genuinely small creators can hope to, make this an arena for their work?
I mean, I really do hope so. And I think we have responsibilities as producers and the enablers, and in some ways the guardians or gatekeepers of these quite specialist and quite sophisticated and quite undemocratic in that sense, technologically sophisticated spaces. It's not quite the same as a theatre where you can say, right, we're going to open up to have a new writers' festival. At this point in time, it's not. I mean, or to kind of really actively lower the boundaries for participation as a maker, not just as an audience member. But I think the weird position that certainly I think we are in at the moment is that it's a bit like being a studio with a responsibility or a commercial imperative to make kind of blockbuster content, because that's what the business is sort of demanding, but really artistically probably be much more aligned with more risky experimental work. So I think we get to a point where we can deliberately and more generously bring people in, whether that's through education schemes, helping to build a kind of ecosystem or a culture of people who are being trained or being exposed to the format to make work. But, you know, what I would love is to kind of get to a point where we could go, okay, we've had shows which are playing for the majority of the year, which have done what the box office needs them to do. Let's have a 3-week festival, or let's have a program that runs during the day that allows people to experiment. And that's how you will cultivate the next generation of people to engage with the art form, I think. Yeah.
Any final thoughts from you, Hilary, and then
Well, just
Michael?
one little thought on that, which is one of the big challenges is that there isn't a circuit for new works to tour or to be at. There are film festivals that will have an XR bit,
Yes.
but there isn't really an established set of fringe venues that small experimental or early stage companies and works can tour around. So, and part of the challenge is about not having venues really. I mean, you're creating your own pop-up one. You've sort of built or you're in a meanwhile venue, but it's a deliberately sort of black box. As more of these immersive experiences become more established and have spaces, I think what else can they offer in terms of being receiving spaces for new works to try out, so that the new players don't have to take on the fixed costs of a building while they're still experimenting and trying out new work.
Michael, final thought to you.
Yeah, in fact, there's a lot of different ways, in fact, to do that. But in terms of creation, what we observe that we have a lot of demands from young creators to be part of the project, because with NFTs, with metaverse, there's a lot of artists that want to show what is digital art, in fact, and what is motion design. We are always surrounded by motion design every day on our phone, cinema, etc. But the motion designers are not really considered like real artists, you know. So it's always the difference between the plastic art and the digital art, you know. So it's a way, of course, for them to show what they can do, what they can create. So my box, my venue will be open for them, of course. We will do like a festival of motion design. We work with Les Gobelins in Paris. We will work with Artifix also. It's some creative schools based in France. But for us, it's really, really important to democratize and show what these artists can do in these fields, in this new type of creation.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to my panel.